Welcome to our new program, False Friends of Fatima. My name is Richard Lehrberger. Thank you very much for being here with us. We have a lot of very important information to talk to you about concerning the message of Fatima. Once again, Christopher Ferreira is with us to discuss his new book, False Friends of Fatima. And on our last episode, Chris and I were talking about Cardinal Angelo Sodano, how on May 13th, 2000, at the Beatification Ceremony for Francisco and Jacinta, two of the seers of Fatima, how at that Beatification ceremony, Angelo Sodano sort of preconditioned the world for the release of the third secret, the party line release of the third secret on June 26, 2000. Chris, thank you very much for being back here with us again today, and let's take it from there.
Thank you for having me. Yes, the preconditioning the world for the party line on the third secret of Fatima, which is that the third secret of Fatima, like the consecration of Russia, is over and done with. It all belongs to the past. We talked about the vision that was published during the press conference on May 13, 2000, which shows an apocalyptic scenario, clearly apocalyptic. We have a pope being executed outside a half-ruined city. The city is filled with bodies. It's devastated by some kind of attack, probably an atomic attack or some other catastrophic weapon was unleashed on this city. And after the pope is executed, bishops, priests, religious, and members of the laity are executed by the same group of soldiers in the same way as the Pope. And these martyrs, the blood of these martyrs is collected by angels and is sprinkled about in atonement for sins. And of course we have in the same vision an avenging angel emanating toward the earth rays of destruction, which the Virgin is able to repel, but clearly not before there is an enormous amount of destruction in the world, including this devastated city, and the martyrdom of a pope. And Cardinal Sodano, we pointed out in the last episode, who at that moment in history, around 2000, May of 2000, was busy covering up the Father Maciel scandal, is now attempting to cover up the true meaning of the third secret of Fatima, which brings us to this press conference in June of 2000, June 26, 2000.
And I think we mentioned on our last program that sort of the big three were there: Cardinal Ratzinger, Cardinal Sodano, and then Archbishop Bertone. They presided over this press conference.
Exactly.
But I'm going to go ahead and just put this out there. I'm assuming that neither Sister Lucy nor even the Pope himself were present at this.
Isn't that curious?
Very curious.
The only person who was not present at the press conference, putting aside the Pope, whose absence was conspicuous enough, the only person who wasn't present at the conference to announce what the last seer had seen and heard regarding the third secret was the last seer.
So the one person who is qualified more than anyone else on the entire planet to be speaking about the third secret of Fatima, she's nowhere to be found.
And Antonio Socci, in his book El Cuarto Segreto di Fatima, the fourth secret of Fatima, meaning the part of the third secret we haven't seen, he notes that Sister Lucia wasn't even permitted to watch this event on TV, although there is a TV in the convent, and the head of the order said that on special important occasions they watched the television. So Socci asked the question, well, gee, what would a special occasion be in the convent at Coimbra if not this? Perhaps the World Championship of Soccer? So she's not even allowed to watch it on TV. Why? Why wouldn't she be allowed to watch this important historical event on TV? Perhaps she might have objected to what was about to happen. And what was about to happen was what I call a funeral for Fatima. The hope was that by the time this press conference was over, Fatima would be buried once and for all, not just the consecration of Russia, but the third secret. So we have already heard about the preventive interpretation of Cardinal Sodano at Fatima on May 13, 2000. And now we're going to have Cardinal Sodano's interpretation guiding the press conference on June 26, 2000.
Once again, somebody who has no teaching authority. His office has no teaching authority, but he is going to tell us what the third secret of Fatima is all about.
Exactly. Now, when the vision, which we discussed in the last episode, was published on June 26, 2000, it was published along with a booklet. This booklet contains the official commentary on what this vision means. In other words, we had to have a commentary prepared by the Vatican to explain the vision because Our Lady did not explain it. Isn't that odd? Now, who prepared the commentary? The commentary is prepared by the then head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who would 5 years later become Pope, the Supreme Pontiff of the Roman Catholic Church. So Cardinal Ratzinger prepares this theological commentary explaining the meaning of the vision. Now, is he guided, since we have no words of Our Lady, by his own theological competence in the matter? Does he attempt to start from scratch and try to figure out this vision using his theological training? No, no. Who does he follow? Cardinal Sodano. It's very curious that in this theological commentary, he says the following, and I'm quoting the pertinent parts. Before attempting an interpretation, the main lines of which can be found in the statement read by Cardinal Sodano on 13 May of this year. Then he says again, for this reason, the figurative language of the vision is symbolic. In this regard, Cardinal Sodano stated. And again, says Cardinal Ratzinger, as is clear from the documentation presented here, the interpretation offered by Cardinal Sodano in his statement on 13 May. And then again, first of all, we must affirm with Cardinal Sodano.
We must.
We must.
That's rather
really?
Curious. That's rather curious because in the press conference, correct me if I'm wrong,
on June 26, 2000.
on June 26, 2000,
right.
Cardinal Ratzinger actually issued a statement that they had no intention of imposing an interpretation of the third secret of Fatima on the faithful.
Absolutely.
So here we have a contradiction.
The Church has no intention of imposing any interpretation, he said, at the same press conference. But in the written official commentary, he's saying we must affirm with Cardinal Sodano.
Why must we?
It's double talk, first of all. We must or we must not. Which is it? Well, obviously, we must not, because Cardinal Sodano has absolutely no authority whatsoever from anybody, certainly not from God, and there's not even a grant of authority from the Pope to tell us what the vision of Fatima means. And isn't it utterly ridiculous that Our Lady would have come to Fatima with this warning for the world, this apocalyptic scenario with devastated cities filled with bodies and a Pope being executed? Isn't it ridiculous that she would leave it to the Secretary of State to tell us what this means?
She would not have done such a thing. She would have explained it herself, and she did.
The same Secretary of State is covering up a sexual scandal? I don't think so. I don't think so. And yet here we have Cardinal Ratzinger saying 1, 2, 3, 4 times that we must follow Cardinal Sodano. Why? Because the Secretary of State, in the new scheme of things since Vatican II, is his boss. It's Cardinal Ratzinger's boss. He is the Prime Minister of the Church. This is a political problem, the message of Fatima. Secretary of State has to manage the problem. How is he going to do it? Well, he's going to become the Oracle of Fatima. Angelo Sodano, the Oracle of Fatima. It's absolutely ludicrous. Yet this is what we were asked to believe on June 26, 2000.
And of course, the whole purpose behind this is to consign the Fatima prophetic elements to the past, because they're at odds with Ostpolitik, the politics of the East, whereby there's no more condemnation of communism anywhere in the world. So the whole point is to get on with the Church's political business of dialogue with other various forms of religion, when Our Lady clearly came to Fatima to ask for the conversion of Russia to Catholicism. So these are all just efforts to consign Fatima to oblivion. As you said, a funeral for Fatima.
Not only that, the third secret is a problem for Cardinal Sodano, because the third secret, from all indications, speaks of a crisis of dogma outside of Portugal, a collapse of faith and discipline in the Church. We have testimonies in my book, The Secret Still Hidden, collated there, and Antonio Socci presents the same testimonies, including Cardinal Ratzinger's statement in 1984, that the third secret pertains to dangers which threaten the world and therefore the life of the Christian. Dangers which threaten the faith and the life of the world and therefore the life of the Christian. Meaning a threat to the sound order of the Church and therefore a crisis in the Church which will be accompanied by danger to the entire world. Well, there's nothing about a crisis in the church in the vision. There's a crisis of exterior enemies attacking people in the church. There's no reference to in an internal crisis. We see only martyrdom. How did the world come to a place where a pope is executed? Outside a devastated city. We have no idea. But Cardinal Sodano is going to tell us. Laughable, absolutely laughable. But then Cardinal Ratzinger goes on to say, and this is very curious, in his official commentary, a careful reading of the text of the so-called Third Secret of Fatima, published here in its entirety, long after the fact, and by decision of the Holy Father, will probably prove disappointing or surprising after all the speculation it has stirred. No great mystery is revealed, nor is the future unveiled. How do we know?
We don't.
Did Our Lady say that? He's telling us that. But on what basis is he telling us that? Cardinal Sodano's opinion. We know the future is not unveiled because Cardinal Sodano says so. That is literally what we're getting here, which means, of course, something must be missing. Because if Our Lady doesn't tell us whether or not this involves the future, then we don't know, do we?
No.
How would we know? Well, and the fact that we can't know without Our Lady telling us what the vision means is revealed by Cardinal Ratzinger himself in the very next sentence. We see the Church of the Martyrs of the century which has just passed represented in a scene described in a language which is symbolic and not easy to decipher. Well, first of all...
So in other words, the vision is not an actual event. It's not a future event that is yet to take place, being described in detail, but it's somehow symbolic of all the people that have died for the faith over the course of the 20th century?
How do we know this? Because Cardinal Sodano says so. Oh, so we should basically trust the fate of the church in the world to the oracle of Fatima, Angelo Sodano, the Secretary of State, who at that moment was busy covering up a massive sexual scandal in the Legionaries of Christ. Sure. But
a comment would almost be superfluous.
It would be superfluous. But the key phrase I want to focus on here is not easy to decipher. So Cardinal Ratzinger, relying on Cardinal Sodano, says we have to go with Cardinal Sodano's interpretation. Because otherwise the vision is not easy to decipher. So think about the implications of that. The Mother of God comes to earth to tell us of an apocalyptic scenario in words that are not easy to decipher. Why would the Mother of God do that? Why would she come to give us something that is so difficult to decipher that no one can decipher it till Cardinal Sodano tells us what it means?
It's completely ludicrous.
Obviously, we're missing something,
yes,
and that would be the Virgin's explanation of how a pope comes to be executed outside a half-ruined city.
And we know that she had to have explained it based on the very last sentence that leads into the third secret that we find in her fourth memoir.
And which is?
In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc.
Now, something very curious happens during this press conference. You mentioned the fourth memoir. That phrase about dogma in Portugal will always be preserved, suggesting a crisis in dogma outside the church, is found in the fourth memoir, which is the most complete memoir, which Sister Lucy produced in order so that she would be able to tell everything, she said, which she was permitted to tell at that time. The etc. represents that part of the third secret she was not permitted to tell at that time. But the fourth memoir is the most complete record of the apparitions. Does the Vatican use the fourth memoir?
No.
It uses which memoir?
The third.
Why do you think they use the third memoir, Richard?
Because it leaves out the sentence containing the etc.
Exactly. And so what happens to the sentence containing the etc. in the Vatican's official booklet?
If I remember correctly, it gets placed in a footnote.
A footnote. Isn't that curious? And what do they call that sentence, which is a quotation of the Virgin?
Now, this goes to Bertone's writing in the Message of Fatima.
Right. That part is produced by Cardinal Bertone, who at the time of the press conference, June 26, 2000, is only the future Secretary of State. Then he's the Secretary of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith under Cardinal Ratzinger.
And he refers to this etc. statement as annotations,
right.
Correct?
Just annotations by Lucy. Just some notes she made. No, it's not. That's what the Virgin actually said. The Mother of God said, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc. The etc. is Sister Lucy's annotation to indicate that the Virgin had more to say.
It was a placeholder.
Placeholder. And that phrase has nothing to do with the first two parts of the secret. The first part of the great secret relates to the vision of hell. And the second part relates to the end of World War I, World War II, the spread of communism, the consecration of Russia to save souls from hell, and the consequences of failing to consecrate Russia, the annihilation of nations. It's got nothing to do with dogma in Portugal. The dogma in Portugal reference commences the third part of the secret, which we find in the fourth memoir, which Cardinal Sodano, Cardinal Ratzinger, Cardinal Bertone ignore very conspicuously. And yet elsewhere in the official commentary, Cardinal Sodano or Bertone, I forget which, back then it was Archbishop Bertone, refers to the fourth memoir as the more complete record.
Yes.
Why would they not use the more complete record? Gee, I wonder why.
Exactly, because the etc. is, that's something that they can't reconcile.
Right. So then we have this problem of a vision that has to be interpreted because Our Lady had nothing to say about it, which is on its face untenable. Clearly Our Lady, who said, "You have seen hell," when the seers knew that they had seen hell, would explain this enigmatic vision which is difficult to decipher.
And I just want to say one more thing about the footnote. If I remember correctly, in the footnote, Bertone writes something to the effect of, Sister Lucy added, and then in Portugal, the dogma of the faithful. Those are the words of the Virgin Mary. They're not Sister Lucy's words.
Right.
And so that's misleading also.
Right. And so this way they avoid the fourth memoir. Now, they had to avoid the fourth memoir because if you look at the official commentary, they have, from the third memoir, a complete statement of the parts of the great secret, part 1, part 2, and part 1 and part 2, which I just discussed, about the vision of hell, World War I ending, World War II, the spread of communism, etc. Those are reproduced in full in the Vatican commentary. But by not using the fourth memoir, they did not have to add that sentence which Lucia included in the integral secret. They did not have to place into the main body of the text the phrase, "In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved." By avoiding the fourth memoir, that sentence was not placed into the integral revelation to Sister Lucia, and therefore they did not have to discuss it. But why did they not want to discuss that?
Absolutely. And I was just going to say also, maybe for themselves, they can at least say, well, we included it, albeit in a footnote.
Well, that's very clever. They had to say something about it because
they had to address
there would be too many questions. But they stripped it from what Sister Lucia faithfully recorded. They stripped it from that and dropped it down into a footnote so they would not have to discuss it. Why? Now, this is very curious. If there's no particular significance to the reference to dogma in Portugal, if there's nothing to hide, why is it not up in the main body of the text? Why was it not taken from the fourth memoir and included with the rest of what Sister Lucia said Our Lady told her? Why? If there's nothing to hide.
Absolutely. And correct me if I'm wrong, but in the press conference on June 26, 2000, a reporter asked then Archbishop Bertone about the etc. And what did he have to say about that precisely? Do you remember?
They asked him whether it pertains to the second part of the secret or the third part of the secret.
And he gave a rather evasive response, if I remember correctly.
This is very curious because I believe he said on that occasion that it could pertain to the second part, but he believes it pertains to the third part.
He didn't discount that it could pertain to the third part, but
Right.
he rather thought that it pertained to the second part.
Well,
of the secret.
but then there are two ways to go with that. Either they haven't revealed part of the third secret, or they haven't revealed the whole of the first two parts of the great secret.
So either way, there's something missing contingent upon the etc.
Yeah. So why didn't they ask Sister Lucy what it pertains to? Why was he stumped? You could have asked Sister Lucy. Well, did they ask Sister Lucy? Well, maybe they did. And if they did, why haven't they told us what she said? Why do you think they haven't told us what she said, Richard?
Because they need to bury the message of Fatima so they can get on with their the Ostpolitik, the new orientation of the church.
Or either they asked her and she told them something they didn't want to hear and they don't want us to hear, or they didn't ask her because they knew what the answer would be.
Which is exactly why the Vatican had a gag order placed on Sister Lucy, I believe, since the late 1950s.
Right. Now, here's the problem we have with this vision. Many people started asking questions about it right away. Where are the words of Our Lady that the Vatican referred to in 1960? Where is the second part of the two-part third secret? Because, as I mentioned in the previous episode, Father Schweigel, when he went to see Sister Lucia in 1952, revealed that there are two parts. One pertains to the Pope, and the other is a continuation of the words of Our Lady following the reference to Portugal. Well, the vision pertains to the Pope. That's obvious. He's killed by a band of soldiers. So where are the words of Our Lady? They're not there. What was so terrible about this vision, if Cardinal Sodano's interpretation is correct?
And we have actually some testimony from Cardinals Chappie and Odie, if I remember, who talk about the contents of the third secret and say that it refers to a great apostasy in the church. And yet, in the vision of the third secret, we don't see anything that pertains to apostasy.
No, and as we proceed through our discussion in this series, you're going to see that Cardinal Ratzinger himself indicates very clearly that what we see in the vision is not all there is to the third secret. But the curious thing is, since we don't have the words of Our Lady, we don't have what Father Schweigel clearly said exists, a continuation of those words, which again is why they avoided the fourth memoir. Now, as I said, this was a funeral for Fatima. They're trying to bury the third secret, and so they have to do it in a way that debunks it, essentially. Oh, you were worried about it. You thought it would involve apocalyptic things, but no great mystery is revealed. Well, if no great mystery is revealed, why was it kept under lock and key for 40 years? It's all about the 20th century. Why wasn't it revealed as nothing more than a part of the second secret, essentially? Because the second secret pertains to 20th century events. And if it reveals no great mystery, then why did Cardinal Ratzinger say in 1984 that it talks about dangers which threaten the faith and the life of the world, and therefore the life of the Christian? What happened to that statement?
Absolutely. And he also gave another statement saying, I don't remember offhand when this took place, but he said that the message of Akita, Japan, if you want to get into this a little bit, and the message of the third secret of Fatima are essentially the same.
Right. Now, we've discussed the vision as evidence of some kind of twin chastisement, but without more, we can't be sure because we don't have the words of the Virgin. Now, what I mean by that is there's a crisis in the church. Something happens in the church that's pretty terrible. And at the same time, something happens in the world. So there's a devastation of the church from within and a devastation of the world from without. And during that devastation of the world, the outside world, the Pope, bishops, and priests become martyrs. So the two things go together. As the church goes, so goes the world. Akita involves precisely such a prophecy. In 1973, in an apparition judged authentic by Bishop Ito of the Diocese of Akita, Our Lady warns in a message that Cardinal Ratzinger confided to the ambassador from the Philippines to the Holy See, is essentially the same. She warns that fire will rain down from the heavens, destroying a great part of humanity, the good along with the bad, and that the living will envy the dead. And the only thing that will foreshorten this disaster is the rosary.
And she also spoke in that same vision of a situation where cardinals would be opposing cardinals,
right,
bishops opposing bishops,
right,
so that we would have this state of the church existing as well. So maybe this enlightens a little bit what we were referring to earlier.
But in keeping with this idea of a funeral for Fatima, they had to bring in a theological heavyweight, so-called, because Cardinal Sodano, he can't carry the water entirely. They need someone else to help them. So
we have to have an argument from authority as well. We have to have the heads of the church coming together and putting a definitive pronouncement on Fatima, so that everyone will say, oh, well, we have the leaders of our church saying that Fatima now belongs to the past, so clearly this is the truth, and now we can get on with our lives.
Well, yes and no, because the leaders of the church really haven't given us a binding or definitive interpretation. I'm referring here to an attempt to enlist a Flemish theologian by the name of Edouard Dany, a Jesuit, who basically dismissed all aspects of the message of Fatima that struck him as unseemly. According to him, there was a Fatima 1 and a Fatima 2. The Fatima 1 is the prayer and penance part. Well, we can all do prayer, do penance and pray. And the Fatima 2 part is all of the prophecies. about the spread of communism and the annihilation of nations, and of course, the third secret. Now, Cardinal Ratzinger's official commentary identifies Donnay, this modernist Jesuit, as an authority on private revelations, an eminent scholar, the official commentary calls him, in the field of private revelations. And this eminent scholar refused to go to Fatima to look at the archives, to satisfy himself as to whether what Lucia heard from the Virgin was authentic.
And he could have actually spoken with Sister Lucy himself, but chose not to.
Right. And here's what Donnay said in one of his publications. This is who the Vatican recites as its authority. Donnay says, all things considered, it is not easy to state precisely what degree of credence is to be given to the accounts of Sister Lucia. And he goes on to say that someone who is sincere can prove to have good judgment in everyday life may have a propensity for unconscious fabrication. This is what I mean by a funeral for Fatima, and as we proceed through the remaining segments of this discussion of the book, maybe we can talk about how this element of the party line is carried through unswervingly by the Secretary of State.
So what exactly is Donna saying here, just very quickly, because I know we're about out of time? Is he saying that Sister Lucy is essentially a very pious fake?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
exactly. He really believes her lies. This is the official commentary back in 2000, which is why the Los Angeles Times said that the Pope, the future Pope, Ratzinger, at the time head of the CDF, gently debunked the cult of Fatima.
Yep. Well, I see we're about out of time here. Thank you very much for being with us, and we'll see you next time. God bless.